Hey everyone, it's Strange Michael. I hope you're doing well today. I decided I would go ahead and start the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie reviews. The only one I don't have in here, well really the only two I don't have in here, are Leatherface from 2017, which I plan on buying sometime soon. But with my experience so far where I've watched a few of these pretty much back to back, I might be rethinking that. I haven't seen Leatherface since it came out, but it's certainly not as bad as some of these movies typically have been. As many of you don't know, there's only one of these films I've never seen before, which was the third film. And I've had some interesting experiences going back and visiting these for the first time in a very long time. The other film I don't own is the 2022 Netflix film, which I reviewed already on the channel in case you want to check out that review, but I wasn't a big fan of that one either, spoiler alert. Anyway, here's the review starting off this whole marathon thing for, what is it, 8 movies? I think 8 movies? I could be counting wrong. I'm going to start off with the original 1974, 4 years before Halloween from John Carpenter, the Texas Chainsaw, I can't get the glare, Chainsaw, 2 words, not one, Massacre. This is directed and written by Tobe Hooper, or co-created by, or with Tobe Hooper. Tobe Hooper, of course, I'm not the biggest fan ever of. He did Poltergeist, which Poltergeist I've always been kind of wonky on. I'm not a big fan of that one. I like Part 3 way more than any film in that series, including the remake and the Part 2 and all of that shit. Not a big fan of Poltergeist. I think he did Funhouse, which was pretty bland, in my opinion. From what I remember of it years ago, I wasn't a big fan of that. That was one of those slashers that have a big kind of hidden gem audience type, like a cult classic type of audience that I'm not a fan of it, if I'm being honest with you. Tobe Hooper is, he's a good director, but he's not a great director in my opinion. However, I think the best thing I ever saw him do was this movie, in my personal opinion, from what I know of his career that I have seen, that I can remember off the top of my head I've seen. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, again, 4 years before John Carpenter's Halloween, had clearly, to me, a bigger budget than Halloween had. It feels bigger. It looks incredible. It's extremely well made. I do think it has flaws. It has flaws that, to me, are something worth talking about sometimes, but of course this is a spoiler-free channel. I don't really talk about spoilers unless I get into those and refer to them in the video. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's really not much to tell you about. Basically, 5 young folks, 2 of them being brother and sister. The brother is in a wheelchair. The main sister is named Sally. They're going to Texas, or they might live in another part of Texas, I don't know, but they're going to Texas in this one particular area to basically visit their grandfather's grave, which was recently desecrated with like, it was like 2 corpses, but like really like 1.5, kind of. The film opens up with that, and it's absolutely horrific. There's a lot of nice atmosphere to this film. These folks, as they go out to this grave, of course, they encounter a local neighbor around their grandmother's old house. When they visit there, just to try to see the old land and whatever, they visit a local house and they're trying to find a stream to go swimming in, where they encounter, at least one of them does at first, a squealing noise, like a pig. And as it gets closer, all of a sudden a man wearing a human skin face mask jumps out, hits him in the head, and takes him away. And that's kind of our first ever introduction to the legendary, which in my opinion is probably one of the weakest of the big horror franchise villains, Leatherface. Leatherface is terrifying. We don't really know anything about him. He doesn't talk. He's just kind of there. He grunts, he whines, he makes pig noises, like I said. He is horrifically scary in this film. And as I've watched quite a few of these back-to-back for this marathon I plan on doing, Leatherface, he's pretty scary. He's genuinely kind of frightening in this movie, particularly. I think this is probably the best Leatherface ever. Of course, Gunnar Hansen plays him. Now, this is a slasher movie, kind of in the days where we really didn't have much of a slasher subgenre of horror yet. We had Psycho, we had Halloween 4 years later, we had some things Texas Chainsaw Massacre probably inspired that weren't Halloween. We had, did I mention Psycho? We had Psycho, we had Homicidal from William Castle. We had a lot of slasher-esque types of things that were building up to this release and beyond it, and from what it's become nowadays in 2023. It's crazy how much Texas Chainsaw Massacre inspired, but Halloween was even more of a bigger deal, just so I can keep throwing that out there to smack people in the face that are Tobe Hooper fans. I'm just messing with you. Please don't get mad at me. Anyway, so again, the film was beautifully shot. This film opens up this idea about who Leatherface is, what is he doing, where he's at in Texas. Of course, he's based on Ed Gein, the real-life serial killer, cannibal, whatever Ed Gein was. I don't really know much about Gein. I don't really study too much on real-life serial killers. I never really had a big obsession with that, but I know a lot of you guys probably do, or a lot of people out there in general are into the whole true crime podcasts and stuff. It can be interesting. I never looked into it. But anyway, so there's really not much more to say about the plot. This film is kind of plotless for the most part. Before the kids encounter Leatherface, or before they encounter the house that he lives in or the area that they go to, they happen to pick up a hitchhiker at one point that in part 2, we find out his name Chop Top. Of course, a different actor. Bill Moseley plays him in part 2. In this film, I don't know the actor, but he's really good as well. Gunnar Hansen, again, playing Leatherface, really good. I think the main kids are mostly fine when it comes to the writing, which again, it's the 1970s. The writing is not the strongest thing ever in horror at that time. It was mostly about storytelling and the atmosphere and that kind of thing. Depending on your goals, that's what they did here, was atmosphere more than anything. And some jump scares. People don't really talk about that with this movie. There are quite a few jump scares, matter of fact. But anyway, talking about the actual film itself, it's kind of plotless. It's kind of plotless, and it's kind of just the kids meandering around going from location to location, but the film flies by. It's like an hour and 20 minutes, and it zooms by. I remember back in the day, this was like the second film of the series I saw, because the first one I ever saw was the remake from 2003, and I loved it when I was younger. And I went to Hollywood Video, where my mom and I rented movies all the time, and we saw this sitting on the shelf, and I picked it up, and I think it was rated like G or PG. It was one of the two. My mom explained the ratings to me back in the day about what it was like in the 70s and how they didn't have like PG-13 and stuff like that. So it was kind of interesting. I don't think rated R even existed at that point, but I could be wrong. Anyway, she explained a little bit about that to me. I've learned more about it over the years. Anyway, kind of surprised me that a horror movie, a slasher movie from Once Upon a Time could be rated for like a kid's audience, basically. So I rented it and I absolutely loved it. I remember how much this movie affected me. And again, the pig squealing scene, horrific. Truly scary. Really gets me every time I watch it. I love it. The tension in that moment are fantastic. But back to the kids. The acting of them is, it's not the best, if I'm being honest with you. They don't have a whole lot to work with in the writing. Specifically Sally, our kind of final girl character, if you will. But the others, Franklin specifically, I think is his name, the brother in the wheelchair. This guy irritates the shit out of me. I can't stand him. I think it's not the actor's fault. It's probably a little bit of the writing, but he's like a mixture of Friday the 13th Part 3's Shelley with Friday the 13th Part 5's guy in the beginning who holds the chocolate bar who gets killed. It reminds me of those two mixed together in the worst possible way, the most obnoxious, annoying possible way. That is what Franklin is like. Every scene that he is in this movie, he is whining, or complaining, or saying, hey, I'm too scared to go do this, or hey, I'm too scared to go do that. Shut the fuck up, Franklin. That's what this whole movie is like around this guy. But everything else, the other actors, characters, all of that stuff, I like all of it, I guess, for the most part. Don't love it, but like it. Find it feasibly decent for this movie. Again, the shots of like the sky and Texas and all of that looks fantastic. It really does look beautiful for the cinematography. They tried to make everything look gross and disgusting and sweaty. People are always sweating in the film, and that really makes sense for what we're doing with this movie. And every time I watch this film, it makes me want to go take a shower. And I haven't seen the film in like 5 or 6 years, and I don't watch this one on a regular basis like I do Friday the 13th and Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street. I finally got around to watching it this time, and I had forgotten that feeling of how I wanted to take a shower again after watching this, because it just does that. It makes you feel nasty every time you watch this shit. But other than that, I really don't have much more to talk about. There's not really any practical effects that I can talk about. Usually I kind of cover that on my reviews. I can't really discuss that either because there's not really any practical effects. I mean, you have, like, lamps, for example, that are made out of human parts. You have chairs that are made out of human bones and hands and shit. And that stuff is really freaky. It really is in this movie. I really appreciate that part of this movie as well. But those effects look great. They really do. But then we're talking about like gore or anything like that. There really wasn't much in this film, to be honest, which is fine because they're going for more of atmosphere than gore, unlike Part 2 and so on and so on. Probably a time restriction. I feel like if this was made nowadays, they would have filled it with gore, just like they have most of the sequels for Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But I don't know. But the film itself, the actual effects that we do see, like the lamp, the chair I talked about, those look fantastic. They look real. It's kind of spooky. That thing in the beginning at the desecrated gravesite I talked about, really, really horrific. It looks real. But other than that, I really love it. There's not really, the final thing to talk about, there's not really a soundtrack. There's kind of just sound effects to fill in for that, for this movie. Those are amazing. They're creative. If you hear those sound effects, you know where they're from, and they're from this movie. You always know, especially that camera flash, I guess is what it is, whatever that sound is supposed to be. Every time you hear that, like, one particular noise, you know it's from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, no matter what you're watching or playing or anything. If you see a video on YouTube and you hear that noise, you know what it's from. Other than that, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974, the OG original movie. Really solid, but I do want to say this. I have always felt that as good as this film is, the ending is never satisfying. I know a lot of people don't care about that because of the atmosphere, because of the idea of, you know, these people are out there possibly. I understand the feeling of that. I understand what they were trying to do with that. I just don't think it's that great, and I think Franklin kind of drags the film down for me as well. But that kind of unsatisfying ending is really kind of a whatever thing for me. It just kind of drags the film down a couple of points for me, but not really a whole lot. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is an absolute classic. If you haven't seen this film, it's probably the best of the whole series. It probably is, if I had to be honest with you. I haven't finished rewatching all the films to rank them in a future video, but for right now, this original film is probably my favorite. It was the remake for a long time, but I recently rewatched that, and that kind of fell out of its, you know, gray spot, if you will. Anyway, if I had to rate this one on a 5-star basis, I'd probably give it probably a 4 out of 5 stars. Like I said, it just kind of goes down a few points for me because of Franklin, because of the ending. But everything else I really like about it. I think it's a really good flick. I think it's a huge recommendation. Again, if you're not really if you're kind of a squeamish person, you might be okay watching this compared to something like Terrifier. You know, you'd probably be fine because it's not really that gruesome. It's just the stuff that it makes you think are probably happening to these people, they will fuck you up. It will. It will, absolutely. Anyway, have you seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre or its sequels? What did you think about it? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching, guys. God bless you all, and goodbye.